Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today is our last session in the Elders Journey program. So it seems like a special moment for all of us who have participated for such a long time. And also today we have a special guest, not really a guest because Ilaria works with the school for a long time. But today we have a special topic on grief that she's also very deeply connected with and helps other people. I will just introduce her briefly with her formal bio. Ilaria Faccioli is a professional counselor with training in Gestalt therapy, Enneatype psychology, and systemic family therapy. She has been a student of Professor Namkhai Norbu since 2008, and she also holds authorization as an instructor of Yantra Yoga and Tibetan Yoga for Kids, Kumar Kumari. In 2015, she began collaborating with the Shanshan Institute, organizing events related to Tibetan medicine and the Tibetan language in Tenerife, where she currently resides. In 2018, she assumed the role of Executive Director of the Tibetan Medicine Department in Tenerife for the International Ati Yoga Foundation. And in 2024, she completed a certified training on contemplative accompaniment to dying and grieving with Nirakara Institute in Madrid. So, Ila, welcome. I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you, Katya. It's nice to see so familiar faces. It's a strange place because I am normally more into the operative aspect when we have workshops, but it's also very, very nice to do it with all of you. Most of you are very dear sisters and brothers for a long time. Some of you are already students of Tibetan medicine. We're already with some years, So I'm very happy to be with you, and thanks. Especially thank you for the ones of you who have been really committed to this program, which has been a bit long and various, and because that is a very strong motivation for us also to go on. And as some of you might remember, this is our second edition, actually. I'm speaking more for the School of Tenerife. Last year we did a first edition of a course, which is actually the last of this long cycle, that was called Embracing Death, and it's the same name that we gave once to this very last part. Because we have been hearing also Dr. Punso speaking about it, and Dr. Jerry, many masters. Everyone is very clear that is a very challenging topic to talk about. But since it's very universal experience, it's good to talk about it. Also because, as Dr. Punso was mentioning, death is inescapable. We know it will come for sure, but we don't know when. We don't know in which circumstances. And so much better to start dealing with it when we have the capacity to do it, when our body is more or less healthy, when our energy is settled, when our mind is clear. I remember in this long course I did about the accompaniment of that, one of the teachers, the professors, was Franko Stasensky, which is a pioneer in this training on accompaniment to death, and also the founder of a Zen hospice. And he often used to say, if you think that in the moment of your death, you will be able to do the job of preparing for that while your body is very weak, in pain, your energy, you're probably very scared, your mind is very unclear, that's a very crazy bet. So you're always saying, do the job now that you can. Don't wait until the last minute to come. And I also would like to start with a quote of Chojala Mankai the dear, the beloved master of many of us, and the founder not only of the Chan community, but the founder of the school, of the Shanshun School of Tibetan Medicine. The book is taken from the quote is taken from a wonderful book that I know many of you know, because Gyala often is often saying, no, the Tupunsuk, how important is this book if someone wants to understand better Tibetan medicine. The book is called Birth, Life and Death, and I will read the quote. So the quote says, from the moment of birth, death is part of our natural condition, and there is no need to be afraid or terrified. Accepting our condition as it is, we must understand what is the nature of the moment of death and what can certainly help us at that time. And these words for me have been more and more, not only a source of inspiration how to go through life and make it life a meaningful experience, but also I would say a source of inspiration to navigate through another experience, very universal experience in life that sooner or later we will all go through. That is the loss, the grief, the death of someone we really love. And as it is for birth and for death, grief is a very universal experience, much more than what we think, and it is also unpredictable and unescapable. Of course, we all wish that we will lose our beloved ones maybe when they are very old, maybe after a long sickness, gradual, or even simply for old age. But the reality is that many people die young, and that death can often come as a very traumatic and unexpected experience, and we don't necessarily have the time to be prepared for that. And this is my own experience. As many other human beings, as many millions of mothers in this planet, I consider myself the survivor of the death of my only son, Leo, who died 2 years ago in very traumatic circumstance at the age of 18 years old. And I think you can easily understand how this extreme and dramatic experience has profoundly changed not only the way I see life, of course, but also the way I see death and loss. And I think this is probably the main experience, the main reason why once more I will spend a little time with you, and I'm happy to do it. And I will do the best I can to convey what life, loss, and Leo have taught me in these 2 years. That has been undoubtedly the most toughest of my life. But after 2 years, I can also start saying the most meaningful ones. And because there is no other way to do it, I will mostly relate on a kind of wisdom, which is basically grounded in my experience, my own, but not only my own, also the experiences of the many parents I am accompanying now to navigate the loss of their children, with the deep wish for them and for myself that this journey through this perilous water of high waves of grief can really teach us how to embrace grief with all the tenderness and the compassion that this requires. And yet, so the very base will be my experience, but it's also true that when we are speaking about, I mean, methods and a systemic reflection are necessary if you're interested, for example, in supporting others, or if you want to understand grief, maybe from a more general point of view. So I will also refer to my practice as a psychotherapist and to a vast literature on grief that is basically the late product of the experience of many people that have been accompanying other people to navigate loss, and whose contributes I found really, really helpful. And last but not least, I will rely on a path which is commonly named spiritual, but that for me has become more and more the real ground of my existence. And therefore, I would like to pay homage to, with extreme gratitude, with all those guides that have taught me not only that things, in a real sense, things are not what they appear, what they seem to be, but also that my own true nature, as the nature of anybody of you, as the nature of anybody else, is really beyond birth and death. So let me do it in a bit of a traditional way. The first person I want to pay homage is Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, which is my root master, but I know it's the root guru of many of you, to whom I own the transmission to discover the real me, which is the most precious gift that I receive in this life, out of love and compassion. And it's the only thing that I'm 100% certain that I will carry with me in the moment that I will have to leave this body. I also would like to pay homage to His Eminence Karchen Rinpoche for the invaluable support he has been offering to the journey of my son Leo, through which he has been showing me that our death sometimes can also be a path of freedom. For his love, his compassion, wide as the vast sky, and for his instructions on the practice of Tonglen from a non-dual point of view, as a very powerful antidote to liberate the heart from a great suffering and to prevent it to get frozen. I also would like to pay homage to Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous, the great Buddhist master and the Nobel Prize, which I personally never met physically in my life, but whose wisdom has been really, really of great comfort in these last 2 years, because of his very precious suggestions on how to conduct our daily life and how to gaze at our inner and outer nature. And they have greatly supported me. And also I have been using many of his methods with other people, and I could see how beneficial they are. And finally, I would like to also express my gratitude to many of my spiritual virtuous companions. Some of them are here. I know they are here because their embrace and their open heart really has been a great balm, and also they have been great source of inspiration of the type of human being that I would like to be. And among them, of course, I would like to remember our beloved Dr. Punso for her incredible kindness, for always having opened her heart, supported me with really unconditional love. My soul counselor, Jane Owen, that has really had the courage to hold my hand and go in a very dark places, but also into my life companion, Manuel, that has been really like a rock, like a mountain, supported me in a very difficult moment, but also many sisters, many brothers, because including my blood sister, because they have been like reflecting like a mirror, precious qualities, and they really have been allowing me to see things from other perspectives. So this was more a traditional introduction, but I think that gratitude is one of the gift that one discover when navigating grief. So yeah, gratitude is an important medicine. we will talk a little bit later about that. So going back to the topic of this talk, for which I choose the title "Embracing Grief," it seems to me was proper, no, given also the more general title of this last phase. I would say that the main purpose of my talk would be to provide some suggestions to navigate loss, basically. And I would like to start by saying that grief is not something like, for example, an illness or a difficult moment of our life that at certain point, we overcome. Grief is something that we need to go through, and basically that we need to integrate in our life. And in this process, we will be profoundly transformed. Very often, the people that I accompany, the groups that I accompany, I often hear this, they often say, I don't pretend to go back to be the one I was, because it's not going to be possible anymore. And nevertheless, I think that there is a kind of glow, of flow, like there is a kind of really of rhythm or flow in the grieving process that where we can see a kind of evolution. And if it doesn't happen, the grieving process can become quite distorted and stuck. And when this happens, that helps us detecting when grief can really turn into something pathological. Even though I don't know like so much this word, but sometimes we have to use words to navigate certain territories. And when this happens, it means it's a condition where we really have to focus our attention, especially if we are therapists, especially if we are accompanying someone grieving, or if we ourselves are grieving. And the signs that the grieving process is becoming, forgive me the term, pathological, are, I would say someone, of course there are many, but I try to put together a list that is the more common, the more visible ones. So chronic illnesses that can affect the body and the mind, chronic pain, immune system disorders, malfunction of the organs, kidneys, lungs, heart, liver, cancer and tumors, and a severe state of prolonged insomnia, anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. Prolonged social disruptive behaviors, prolonged non-acceptance of reality, even when the years pass by, or stuck narratives. For example, we keep on telling to ourselves certain kind of stories like, why me? I didn't deserve this. Or, oh, when he or she was alive, now then that she's not anymore with me, no? Or prolonged intense emotion that cannot be self-regulated, especially sadness and rage. They are the most common, but can be shame, can be many other kind of emotions. And prolonged incapacity of perform daily activities. So I want to clarify that when I say prolonged, I refer to a time frame of at least 3 years, because many of those behaviors are really quite normal in the first phase of grieving. And they can also keep on happening with less intensity, less often, but they can keep happening. But when they keep the same intensity, they don't shift after 3-4 years of grieving, that means that we really need to focus attention on that. Is it okay? Am I going too fast? Well, how about the translator? Are you okay? Great. So I think in generally, change is really a good point of view to observe everything in our life. But it's particularly interesting for me in observing the grieving process, because in the grieving process, something needs to shift. And if it does not happen, then grief turns into a very dark spot, like the impression is to be in this black vortex that really drag us toward the bottom. Whilst in my experience, but it's not just my experience, there are many stories about that, grief can be one of the most transformative experience for a human being. And so, since we are speaking of a process of change during a time frame, I really would like to say something about and introduce the concept of phases or stages during the grieving process. And in this direction, the real first model that was elaborated to describe the stages or the phases of grieving was done by Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, which was really a very pioneer of accompany people to dying, but also in the grieving process. And she talks about mainly about 5 stages in her book, in a book that was published in 1969, and that it was titled is On Death and Dying. And originally, the model was formulated just to describe people that were having an incurable terminal illness and that were facing their own death. But later, she really discovered that this model was very useful, very adaptable to people that were going to the process of grieving. And mainly the 5 stages that she elaborated. Then after she also, there are some kind of middle stages, but it's not that important. I just want to give briefly this idea is that there are the 5 main stages are shock and denial, is we can call it like normally it's the first phase of grief where the news of the death comes, and when it comes, it generates a shock that can be smaller or bigger, but it always generates a rupture, because when we are announced that someone it's dead, basically the first reaction is this cannot be fixed. If even when we are announced that we have a very serious illness, there is always a part of us that thinks, oh, maybe, the hope. And in many cases that works, There is likely a part in our mind that says, okay, I can still fight for that. But when someone tells us this person is dead, there is nothing to do. We cannot go back. And accompanied to this very first phase, often there is a process of denial, that we don't want to listen, we don't want to hear. Most of the time we keep very busy with now in Western society, death it's a very busy aspect, so we try to keep ourselves busy with the many things that we have to do when someone dies. And then the following phases can be anger. Anger can be anger and guilt, I would say, that can be towards ourselves, because what we were not able to see, or what we didn't do that was necessary to do. But also sometimes anger towards the person that left us, that is quite normal. And then there is also a phase that it's called bargaining, where we start entering in a kind of negotiation, that can be religious based. For example, oh God, please let me see him again, or let me hear his voice, and if that happens, I will do this or that, or I won't do this and that. Often there is a very wide phase of depression or of sadness. And then the final phase is the acceptance. It's also true that Elisabeth Kubler-Ross often says that these phases not necessarily happen in this. Sometimes they are mixed, sometimes one comes first and the other, And so for this talk, I actually was reflecting a lot on these stages, and I decided to move forward with what I sense is basically a movement of the grieving, and which I experience like an evolutionary movement. And so I basically will talk about 3 stages, 3 main stages that we can even say corresponded to 3 years, but please don't take this word year as a solar year. It's more pointing out a stage, and that they are sort of a container to observe how the process of grieving. And the first stage, I call it the trauma of death and the disclosure of the healing path. The second stage, I call it learning to surrender. And the third stage is integrating. And I would like, of course, let's start from the first one. The trauma of death and the disclosure of a healing path. And this stage that, as I said, my last 1 year, but not necessarily. For some people can even be 2 years. That's not the main thing. But at certain point, the only important thing is that we need to shift to another stage. If this doesn't happen, then we have to focus our attention on that. In the first phase, in the really first moments of this stage, it's what happens is really similar to what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was mentioning about the shock, no? The trauma, no? That there is, as I said, there is always a trauma when we receive the news of a death of someone that is very close to us, of course. And trauma in many, like in general, is defined like a severe and lasting emotional shock that comes with or after a very upsetting experience. And that is a very upsetting experience. Of course, the trauma, the level of trauma depends on many factors, you know. How close was the person that left us? So what kind of bond we have with this person? How young was that person? And how dramatic were the circumstances of death? Because of course, it's not the same if we lost someone that for old age or long illnesses, maybe our parent or our grandparent, that if we lose our kid, our child, for in a very traumatic circumstance. There is a difference, but yet there is always a certain level of trauma. And generally, in this very first moment, we enter in shock because we understand that what happened is not fixable, and the shock, it's kind of a defensive mechanism of the mind that protects us for a pain that cannot take all at once. In generally, the sensation is body and energy are very shaken, and our minds often get frozen. You know, there are many in the literature now, many description of, for example, even in the animal realm now, when the lion catches the gazelle in the very first moment, when the gazelle realizes that the lion is almost on earth, the gazelle freezes herself. No, so, and this freezing aspect is really something that in certain ways healthy, because it protects us to feel such a huge pain. And also, of course, if death happens in dramatic circumstances or quite unexpected, the person can feel huge peak of anxieties that are almost impossible to regulate. And generally, they are also accompanied by loss of appetite, of sleep. Sorry, I just make a little pause because I want to tell you that since there are many informations, I have also a written document that then if someone is interested, we can send, so that, because otherwise I don't want you to spend too much time to focus on single aspects. So if you are really interested, then maybe Katya, we can share it, we can send it and put it in our platforms. I really would like to say something about anxiety, because anxiety is nowadays is a very common word. No, everybody says, "Oh, I feel so anxious," "Oh, I feel anxiety." No, it's very common, and anxiety definitely seems to be the very narrow path to enter grief. And I would like to do it by recalling the Spanish word. I really like pretty much the Spanish word for anxiety, that is angustia. Angustia comes from a Latin word that means angosto. And angustia really, for me, at least to me, gives a lot the feeling of when we enter in a very narrow place where we can, with the body is very constricted, we can almost not breathe. We are almost on the verge of a panic attack, no? So everything is too narrow, it's very narrow, no? And what it becomes very narrow basically is it's the entrance of our heart. And because the heart needs to be protected from a very deep suffering. And even if in the very first moment, this anxiety can, as I said, be a very normal defense mechanism, I have noticed that in prolonged mourning, in a mourning that becomes somehow pathological, this tends to be a mechanism that actually prevents the person to enter in the real grief. So the person can take a long time before to really experience loss and grief, because it is stuck in this angosto, in this space very narrow. Another very common response in this very first phase of grieving is the feeling of being guilty. This is very, very common, very common. Among parents who lost their children is almost universal. And it doesn't matter what were the circumstances of the death, there is always a part in us that feels, I could have done something different. I didn't realize that. I was not good enough. I was too selfish. So, and we enter in this persistent rumination of thoughts of what we could have done in order that things could have been different. Basically, we feel guilty that we couldn't save our beloved one. And so we go back and forth imagining possible scenarios on how things could have really been different. Because it's really hard. I think the main point is that it's really hard to accept that life and death actually are beyond our control. We cannot control them. And but accepting these requires a certain dosage of resilience. And it's very difficult at the beginning of the mourning process. But guilt has also another important function. And it is that it also protects us. In more than protecting us, it's kind of a way through which we keep the bond with our loved ones. Because when we imagine those scenarios, so I see thousands of times that scene where I could have said something different, I could have act different, somehow is a way in which I keep being with my beloved one. And that is very important at the beginning of grieving, because it's not that easy to let go. So at the beginning, we need to keep it, you have something that helps us to keep this being very close to us. And then, let's say after this beginning part of this first stage, we start experiencing certain symptoms in all the levels. Can be on the body, can be on the level of the mind, of the energy. And for example, at the level of the body, it's very normal to have a general state of pain. I often notice now, especially when mothers come, and even after months and years, and at least in the first 2 years of grieving, now there is a lot of complaint about the shoulders, the heart, the chest. Now there is a lot of general pain in the body. And it's also very often that our immune system can become weak. So we are basically exposed to much more, to any kind of illnesses. And on the level of energy, we become utterly unstable. And we are constantly, in the first months, really constantly shaken by emotional peaks that are completely out of control. And that can expose us to any kind of provocation, because we cannot regulate our energy. And so we can be pretty much exposed to not just to the pain that we feel inside, but also to very unpleasant and painful situation that comes from outside. We feel desperate, out of resources, and the general feeling is nothing really works. And on the mind level, that can vary. I'm trying to make it generally, but of course, individuals are individuals. We always have to take this in consideration. But in general, people experience that they are drawn into a permanent or semi-permanent confused condition, where everything feels extremely overwhelming. We literally feel that the heart is too heavy to carry on the chest. And often people say that they feel like they are living in a dreamlike state, where reality loses its grip and its boundaries. I remember often in the first year, the feeling I often was having was to see the world beyond like a foggy window. Everything was very foggy, you know, I couldn't really touch it. I couldn't really grasp it, you know. And this often is accompanied by the sense of completely loss of identity and generally a loss of interest in life. We often ask ourselves, what is the reason to keep living, to keep being alive? And also because the idea to go back and somehow be able to enjoy life, it's very unbearable if our beloved one cannot. How can I go back and enjoy life if my loved one cannot do it anymore? In general, the ability to perform daily activities like cooking, cleaning, shopping, making a phone call, even making a phone call, extremely difficult, for example, if we are a caregiver, for example, if we are a mother that has other children, or if you have to take care of your parents or your husband or family. Very difficult to do that, really. And this is why grief, it's important to see grief, especially when it happens in a family, in a systemic perspective, because grief in a family never affects just one person, you know, it affects the whole system. Everything feels really overwhelming and we are lost, we are confused, we don't really know what to do, no? Another typical aspect is that our social skills collapse. And even if solitude is very frightening at this stage, but we have a strong tendency to isolate ourselves because the others become very threatening. You know, we are very afraid to be judged. We are often afraid by the commentaries that people can do. I have to say, with a lot of reason, because sometimes we are not trained for grief, generally, socially. And so people sometimes say really terrible things, no? Like I've listened, for example, someone telling to a mother that lost his children, oh, but you already have other 2 children. Who cares? You know, that children will never come back. So people can say very terrible things, no? So we tend to isolate because this kind of commentaries can really shatter us down, no? And family and social gathering become impossible situations. And what I generally observe also in other people is that there is a progressive selection of the relations we are able to keep. So, for example, we tend to eliminate people that cannot stand our suffering, or people because or social situation where there is just superficial talk or chatting, because that makes feel really vulnerable. Also, I want to say something about crying. I know that crying is, it's seen in a different way because there are also cultural aspects. No, I think Dr. Punzo was touching this, and she was saying that crying in some cultures is not good because we believe that our dead ones are on a journey, and so if they see us crying, then they cannot go. No, but I also think that crying is also a way to release suffering. But what I do see is that both excessive crying and not crying at all can affect our mental and our physical health. So, what we can do when someone is undergoing this phase, how we can help, what can be effective antidotes, and to help the people to entering in a kind of healing path. So first of all, I want to say something which I think is very important. Also, not only for grief, but for example, if we are accompanying someone in the dying process, is that it's extremely difficult to help someone if we are not ready to hold space for suffering, also for our suffering, because suffering will challenge us sooner or later. And the very first and most essential thing that someone who suffers needs is not practical advices, is not that you tell them what she should do or she shouldn't do. It's simply that you can be there for his or her suffering, just maybe sometimes in silence, sometimes just holding the hand. And sometimes when we accompany someone who is undergoing a deep suffering, the reality is that we don't have the right words and we don't have the right actions. But this is okay, because actually as I experienced, the most profound request that someone who is mourning a loss is, can you be with me with an open heart, even when nothing can be fixed, even if there is nothing to do? And so we have to ask these questions to ourselves. We have to be very honest. Sometimes we are not ready for that. And it's much better to be honest about that than to pretend. And then when we are challenged by suffering, we actually run away, or we do, or simply we don't have really the presence to be at the side of someone who is suffering. And another thing that I would like to say is that if we want to open the heart to someone who is grieving, we have to understand that there is no good way of grieving, as there is no good way of dying. So anyone who is grieving, do the best they can. And grief cannot be transformed because someone is telling what to do or what not to do. Only the person who experiences grieving can pull herself out of the rushing water of sorrow to the other shore. You cannot do that for them. So my suggestion is, please be very careful with attitudes like, you should do that, you shouldn't do that, this is very good for you, this is not good for you. And be very aware that grief demands a very profound respect. And we are no one to judge someone else's process. My master Namkai Norbu often used to say that when you are dealing with the others, you need to really learn to respect their dimension. We need to be open to the dimension of the other without judging it, without projecting on them our belief systems. And if we are really not ready to do that, I'm really afraid help won't work. But having said that, now I will go to outline maybe some things that might definitely be useful. No, it'd be useful if you are accompanying someone who is grieving. In the very first moment, like as I said, the moment of the shock, of the trauma, it can be basically very helpful if you can help, or if you yourself can do some daily task for the person, like for example, cooking or cleaning or shopping, everything that this person feel overwhelming. But please be mindful to do it, just to do it in a very delicate way, and always ask first, because not always what we think is right for the other person. And here, forgive me, but as student of Tibetan medicine, I really have to say something about diet. So for example, if you are cooking for someone who is in this condition, so try to cook light and warm meals, something that is very easy to digest, but is nutritious, but can really warm the digestive system. Loss of appetite is a very common symptom. And so if we have something that is easy to eat, that will help the person at least to support the body and the energy. Any tea or food that is good for lung is good for grief, because grieving is actually considered in Tibetan medicine one of the causes for lung, for the element wind to increase. Loss of sleep also is quite common. So if you can help the person with some herbs or some teas that can help the person resting, that will be very good. But please avoid strong tranquilizers, because they have very strong side effects. So in most of the cases, the person will feel very stoned, very heavy, and there is no reason to add more heaviness to the heaviness that the person already feels. Of course, in the case where insomnia becomes very severe, you need to consult a professionist. I also would like to say something about treatment, psychiatric treatments, because nowadays I see more often really that people that are a great number of people that are grieving, they are medicated. So the very first thing when they go to the doctor, they are medicated for the grieving process. And I always have a natural tendency to ask myself, why? Because often what the feeling I have is that the Western conventional medicine tends to confuse grief and depression. So, oh, that happened to me. I went to a doctor at the beginning, and the first thing he proposed was an antidepressant. And I said to him, I'm not depressed, I'm grieving. And he was kind of shocked, no, when I said that. I mean, it's true that, of course, when the grieving becomes very intense and very prolonged, that can cause depressions. But the person is not depressed, the person is grieving. And I think it's important to make a point on that. Nevertheless, I have to say, I'm not necessarily against medication, but what I really feel is that medication needs to be managed in a very proper way and for a specific period of time. Medication can be a support, but cannot be a solution for grieving. And since we are speaking about treatments, there is something that I want to say. Might sound a bit alternative, but I have, following positive experiences, I have been investigating a lot on that. In the usage of microdoses of psychedelics during the grieving process, and among them mescaline, dimethyltryptamine, and psilocybin. And I'm talking really about small doses. It means 10% of a normal dose. It means a dose that you actually basically don't feel. In the literature, it's called a sub-perceptual dose. And I've in the vast literature now, thanks God, there is more and more literature, also scientifically. It starts to be scientifically proven that a great number of people that have been tested repeatedly reported that the use of microdoses has been really created a shift in their process of grieving, and that at certain point they actually by themselves start lowering the doses, naturally start lowering the doses while they felt they were emotionally recovering. I really feel they can be useful, of course, as usual. They can be managed in a proper way and by a competent person. But what seems to be in the literature, of course, there are still needs to be more investigated, but that they are definitely less addictive than common antidepressants or anxiolytics. And since we are speaking about treatment, I also would like to mention the importance of psychotherapy, especially when it's done by someone that has experience in grieving, and especially when it's done by someone that has a very open heart. Psychotherapy is almost quite always necessary in the grieving process, at least in a certain phase of the grieving process. I'm not saying that it's necessary always, but there is, I've noticed everyone at certain point feels the need to do that. And there is a lot that can be said about psychotherapy, but I don't think it will be too long. So, and I don't think, I mean, unless you are already a therapist, so my suggestion is go and read. There is a lot of literature on that. But if you are simply someone that is interested in helping people grieving, I don't think you need to be a psychotherapist to do that. So maybe maybe the person can be supported by psychotherapy and also by your help. So I don't think that there is the necessity today to go, because it would be a very long topic. But the only thing I would like to say, there are many psychotherapeutic approaches, but what I've noticed, especially in the first phase, when we are dealing with the trauma of the loss, somatic psychotherapy is very useful to access trauma. Very, very useful. So let's go more to speak more again. Sorry, but I am a Tibetan medicine student, so certain things are stuck in my mind. So diet, behavior, you know that, no? So let's talk a little bit about behavior. Some things are maybe useful to mention about behavior. Being in nature is extremely healing. The elements, we've heard many times Dr. Punso talking about that, are the very base of our outer and inner nature. So they have a very healing power. That's what it is, you know. Especially when they enhance pleasant perceptions, for example, such as very calm and peaceful images, or very pleasant smells, or very harmonious sounds, and so on. So if you can be in a place where you can experience those things in nature, that is extremely helpful. And if you're helping someone, that can be a good thing, no? A nice walk in the woods, or if you live in a sea place, no, just go and walk and see the waves, for example, no. But of course, avoid extreme weather conditions. So avoid excessive wind, excessive cold, or excessive heat, for example. Another important suggestion is to avoid crowded places and excessive interactions. So try to choose people that are more peaceful and calm. That will help a lot. Mild exercise, especially as you already know, because you have been hearing Dr. Punsok speaking about the benefits of yoga and yantra yoga. I hope you have been following Naomi with breathing exercise. So all the exercise that is focused on breathing is perfect. I don't think that that can be done at the very beginning of the first phase breathing process, but after some months, they might really be very useful, because as it has been said many, many times, exercise that can train our body to enhance our breathing are powerful, very powerful to settle the energy and calm the mind. Avoid the challenge activities, especially the one that can stress our nerve system. Avoid exposition to screens. I don't have to say it. I think we all know at this point that passing many hours in front of a screen is not good for our nerve system. But if you are grieving, can trigger really the nerve system, can be cause of loss of sleep, can really affect our capacity. In generally, I am very pro self-help groups. I experienced them myself. I work with some of them because I notice and I know what people often report, no? Only someone that has lived the experience that I've lived can understand me. And so self-help groups are very important. And in a second stage also, they are important because you start feeling that you can support others, you know, that understanding this type of suffering, you can also be very useful. And that is also helpful. And last but not least, I would also say that engaging in mindful practices is very, very useful. I don't think that you can engage in a mindful practice in the very, very first stage of the grieving, because your mind is not there, because some things have to happen. But more or less after 6, 7, 8, 9 months, if the process is going, I think they are very useful. And in my experience, there are some that works better than others. Of course, I use some that are coming from the Buddhist tradition, but definitely people don't need to be Buddhist to do those practices. I generally found out that Shine is very effective practice, very beneficial practice. Shine is a transliterated Tibetan word that refers to a practice that is done to calm the mind, and has the great benefit to focus ourselves, to help focusing, and to reduce the mental activity and the emotional reactivity. And generally, we perform by posing or resting the mind on one single object. And the goal is to cultivate really presence and equanimity. After having tried different versions of it, I found that the practice that are done more focusing on body sensations and on the flow of breathing are more effective, and often I use ones that are coming from the Zen tradition, especially from Thich Nhat Hanh. They have very positive impact, and I think that the reason why they are more effective is because body and breath are powerful anchors, because both of them are very connected to life in itself, and so they trigger some vital force that it's pretty much needed when we are dealing with death. And I will also mention another series of practices, and then I would like to stop a little bit and maybe do something practical and not just blah, 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 talking so much. And among the mindfulness practice, I think that they are very beneficial, all the practices that help us to access the space of the heart. Because heart, it's the source of our suffering. You know, most of the people that are undergoing grieving, they often describe themselves as with a broken heart. But heart is also the source of the antidote of love, that is the very cure for suffering and for loss. I will never be stressed too much on this important ingredient of love. Love is a real medicine. Love and kindness are the real medicine for someone, in general for suffering, but especially for someone who is grieving. Because it's only through love that we can access this space of the interconnectedness, of the connection with something that it's greater than our small self. And so we can stop the narrative of feeling that we are always separate from someone or for something else. In the Buddhist tradition, love is considered to be an essential quality of our human nature. But unfortunately, what the Buddhist tradition says that for many reasons, this quality has often been obscured by our habits or our emotional reactivity. And so somehow we have to learn how to get back in touch from this experience that really can be very vivid, very vibrant, and that hopefully at certain point we can really experience as something that self-arise. And I think in case of grieving, but in any case of suffering, the only way that we can really access love in a very authentic way is when we have the courage to enter the wound. There, where it hurts more. There, the wound will bring his gift, will bring his antidote. Love also, I think it's something that can really shift the narrative that we have in our mind while we are grieving, because in this very first stage, I think one of the most painful things is that it's very hard to bear that I cannot see his face or her face anymore. I will never be able to hear her voice or his voice. I will never be able to experience the physical presence of this person. This is really, really very hard to take. And so only when we start experiencing that our potential for love is as profound as our experience of love, then something shifts. And so we can slowly, slowly move from a narrative of absence, lacking, deprivation, to a narrative of love, of connection. In the Buddhist teaching, there are many meditations on something. Actually, love is considered to be one of the precious treasures. It's called because love has the potentiality to become immeasurable, boundless love. And I do suggest it is this practice of immeasurable love. It's a very good practice that we can do in the grieving process, because generally in the tradition you start doing the practice with someone that you love, and then slowly you can widen the space of your heart and include all the human beings, all the beings in this dimension. And so why not starting with your beloved one? But what I also, because I made some mistakes there, so I can tell you that it's not the first practice of love I would start with, because it can be very intense. It can be too intense. So a practice that I would like to propose today is a practice that I've learned from John Roshi Halifax. John Roshi Halifax is an activist, a caregiver, a pioneer in the accompaniment to death and grieving, and an important Zen Buddhist master, teacher. And this practice is called strong back and soft heart. And is one of the practices that I share the more, or at least is the first, when we entering in the territory of love, is one of the first practices I share with people that are mourning. And what is about? Basically, it's a practice where we can experience during a meditation session a kind of balance between the ability to cultivate a strong back, something we can always rely on, that is the source of our equanimity, the source of our resilience, the capacity that we have to stand still, even in the midst of a torment, and a soft heart, that is our capacity to be open to everything, even to suffering, to not lose tenderness, to not close the heart. And that brings benefit, because when people start experiencing that no matter what, their back can be strong, then they can open the heart. But it's very difficult to guide them opening the heart if they don't have something that they can rely on. And this practice for me has many goals, many aspects, but is a very good practice to foster equanimity and resilience, which are for me two neglected qualities, not in the Buddhist tradition, of course, but in general in our Western cultures, they are neglected qualities, but they become very important when we are experiencing a great suffering. Because both of them has this capacity to get in touch with suffering, but not to be swept away by it. And the equanimity does it in a way that we basically find a stable point, no? The capacity to be in the midst of a torment, and the resilience is our capacity to adapt to any conditions, and so to go through trauma, to go through adversities, any kind of adversities. So before going to break, I think I really would like to spend a few minutes on this practice. So I hope you don't mind. I also think it's a way to rest excessive and discursive mind. So I would like to invite you to sit wherever you are. If you are seated on a chair or on the floor, remind the precious suggestions that Naomi was giving us in the first cycle of this course. So she explained about this Vairochana position, no? That basically is, well, first of all, ground yourself. So if you're seated in a chair, try to keep your knees a little bit open and your feet really grounded on the floor. And the main point of this position is that you try to keep your back straight, but shoulders should be open and relaxed, not tense. And in order to keep the back straight, you might want to put your hands on your knees, and also to withdraw a little bit your chin, so that you can also straighten this part of the neck. Our gaze is relaxed and our mouth also is relaxed. My invitation is that you can close the eyes, and that just for a short moment you can focus on your body sensations. Some of them might be unpleasant, but some others might be pleasant. And try to see if there is the need to accommodate your position. Try to do what your body needs to be more comfortable. And also now you can go more into the subtle, more subtle level of the breathing. And so for just a couple of breathings, try to bring your presence on the flow of your breath while you breathe in and while you breathe out. And now bring your presence to your back. You can bring it to your physical back, to your spine cord. And try to connect with the strength of your back. This back that always supports you, no matter what. That allows you to walk, to stand still, even to sit. Try to really connect even physically with this quality of strength that the back has. It doesn't need to be perfect. There is always some pain here and there, but it is part of the back nature. Back supports. And maybe if it's helpful, you can start repeating yourself a bit like a mantra. Strong back while breathing in. And you can simply rest and relax there while breathing out. And we do this for some cycles. So while breathing in, we repeat to ourselves, strong back. And we rest, we pause on it while breathing out. If the mantra is not useful, let it go. You can do the same, just following your breath. Bring the presence while breathing in and relax there while breathing out. If your mind gets distracted, don't worry, that's quite normal. Just gently, softly, bring it back to your back. Bring the presence there while you're breathing in and relax while breathing out. And now I suggest you to move to your front, to your heart. You can start connecting with the physical space of the heart. You can even bring your hands there if it's useful. You can try to connect with this nature, this rhythmic, pulsating nature. Heart is the source of life. His main task is to pump the blood that circulate throughout our body. But a heart is also a wide, open space that allows us to open to any experience of life, that allows us to open to others. Heart, by nature, has a very soft and tender quality. Spacious, soft, and tender quality. So I invite you to bring your presence there in this open space. And you can do it with the mantra of soft heart, while breathing in and then relaxing, allowing yourself to relaxing in this space while breathing out. Or if the mantra doesn't work, just bring your presence there while breathing in and then relax into it while breathing out. Soft heart. And now I invite you to experiencing both of them at the same time. Back can be strong, while earth can be soft. And that allows us to stand still in the midst of almost everything without having the necessity to close the heart, to freeze the space. So if the mantra has been useful, I invite you to combine the two mantras, and you can tell to yourself soft back while breathing in. Strong back while breathing in, and soft heart while breathing out. Strong back while breathing in, and soft heart while breathing out. Now, for a moment, let go everything. Let go the mantra, let go the breathing, let go everything, and simply relax into whatever comes. And before coming back, maybe you can just reconnect with your breathing, with your body. Again, if your body needs to be stretched or needs something, or maybe you need to do a more deeper breathing, just allow it. Allow it. Give yourself what you really need. Welcome back. I think it's a good time to take a pause. Maybe it's something like 7-8 minutes. So in my watch is 17. Maybe we can come back at, let's say, oh, maybe at 20 or 25. 25, not 20 will be too less. Okay, 25. At least time to go and pee. And I think we don't put any words now, but if there is something that then lately you want to share, maybe we can do it in the question and answers space. So I will see you back at 25. Thank you.